Everyone doing okay? Had a nice dip in the springs, got down there, got cooled off just a little bit. Wow, this couldn't turn out to be a better day for this. This is the type of day when you start, type of afternoon, and you start understanding why people settled here. You know, looking around the landscape, just a minute ago we had a wind come through and it blew all the papers around, and we started running around trying to find rocks, and people found all these rocks, and someone put this little rock down right over here on one of these papers. And I was picking it up just a minute ago, and I looked at it and I go, wow, look at the story written in this rock. Every force on this planet leaves its mark. The story that's written in this rock happened millions of years ago in the ocean, when everything started tumbling together and all the silica particles started to come together, forming a shirt nodule. That's what this is. It's a shirt nodule. Found right here. Right over there. It's a story written in this piece of rock. Now I want you to take a minute, and I want you all to look around what you see here. Take a look and look at everything you see around here. Now try to do me a little favor here. This is going to be a little tricky, but try to do it. Block out all the houses. Block out all the fences. Block out the roads and all the other structures. Even change the land around where it's no longer a flat piece of land. It's more rolling. And that's the type of environment that a guy named Billy Barton would have come into back in 1837. When Billy Barton came here, we like to start, everyone starts the story of Barton Springs because it's called Barton Springs, with the story of Billy Barton. Billy Barton came here, he actually came from South Carolina, came to Texas, and settled in what was called Austin's Little Colony. And Austin's Little Colony was over toward Bastrop. Now, the legend goes that someone moved within 10 miles of him and he said that was too close, so he wanted to move on to someplace else. Well, I'm sure that the story is a little more complicated than that, because when he moved here to this area was 1837. Anybody recognize that date? Came right after 1836. The big uproar that was the Texas Revolution. And when we think about the Texas Revolution, we think about the battles. But we have a tendency to forget about the complete social fragmentation that happened during the big scrape, the runaway scrape, when everybody was moving around. Not only that, but Texas won its independence from Mexico. Suddenly, all land titles became suspect. Lots of things were going on. Well, Billy Barton decided to move himself. He had 2 brothers. He had at least 2 daughters, maybe 3. He had his wife. And according to records, he had at least 1 slave. And in a record I came across a while back that was, it's called The History of the Negro in Travis County. It was written back in the 30s. It actually says he had 30 slaves when he moved here, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. His operation here would have been a farming, ranching operation, and he needed labor. And at that time, what was the labor? Slaves. That makes this site we are standing on right now the first African-American community in Austin. Before that, there was only 1 slave documented in Austin. But when Billy Barton came here with his folks, that's what he established. That is one of the little stories that is written here. His cabin, somewhere right around where we are, may have been right over there. If we look at...
Could it have been that log cabin over in Zilker, over by the rose garden?
No, that's the Swedish cabin that was moved in from Bastrop. Okay, right. No. But this is a blow-up of what's called the Sandusky map, which was the original layout of the city of Austin. You know, I'll hold it up. Y'all see it okay? This is the blow-up of the lower corner of that, which shows Barton's. You can see the cabin there, the fence line, and there are a couple of things I want you to point out. One is this little feature right there, that water feature. More than likely, from the location of that, that is what we now call sunken gardens. right over there. Okay. Now, you see this little creek right here coming down? That's the creek that runs down the big drainage whale that goes down right by the diving board. By the way, that's an indicator, as I'm sure someone's talked about earlier, that's an indicator of the faults that actually created the springs. So this is Billy Barton's homestead. And if you look at the land, you look at this map and you think about where Sunken Gardens is, and you think about this in somewhat scale, that's a pretty darn big piece of property. Okay, so what did he do here? Why did he move here? Well, like I said, every force, everything on this planet leaves its mark, leaves its track. The landscape we have around here, the physical landscape we have around here, are the marks from those that came before us, people like Billy Barton. Yes, sir.
It's a kind of astounding story you're telling right now, because I can imagine, I would imagine that this place would have been populated for a long time, at least by the Indians, and anybody that had moved here earlier would have loved to have that fresh water availability. So what's your understanding of why it was available to him in 1837, which is, you know,
that's a good point. We're starting our I'm starting my tale with obviously the European settlement, but that's not the only stories that are in this landscape. If you were to dig down right underneath our feet here, you would run across Native American artifacts. How far down, I don't know, but they would be here. Because this whole area was used as camping grounds for the peoples that lived here. We heard the stories just in the previous talk about that very thing, how this was viewed as a sacred springs. But the thing to remember, these are mostly nomadic peoples. Another thing to remember is that in the 1800s, early 1800s, there was a massive change going on in the native populations. Had to do with the coming of the horse, and specifically the Comanche becoming the masters of the horse and the masters of the plain, and the particular culture that the Comanche developed, a raiding culture. This was a disputed area. Everyone could come here, but no one could stay. Billy Barton had that European mentality as I'm going to put my stakes down. Wasn't like it was an easy thing for him. There were documented efforts of attacks on his settlement, people dying here, people being buried around here. There's even a famous story of him running away a raiding party just by his bluster. Okay, so this was literally the edge of the European settlements. In fact, that's a major reason why Austin is here, is because the second president of the Republic, Marabou Lamar, wanted a war with the Indians. So he purposely moved, besides the fact that he didn't like Houston, both the city and the man, he decided he said he wanted to move the capital to this new place. He'd gone hunting here, and there was a guy that lived down in the little village, the little 4-cabin village that was down on the other side of the river called Waterloo. Talked him in, invited him in, and this was a beautiful place. There were springs all over the place. There's lots of wildlife. There was the big springs right here, but besides the big springs, there are springs all over the community. And so he said, this was 1839 was when the city of Austin was founded. So he came in about 1838 when he saw that. Billy Barton would have been here about 1837. Okay. That makes you wonder about his story. Right, okay. I want to put up something real quick here. Kind of jumping around, I know. Remember I said there were 4 cabins at Waterloo. Mr. Barton, with his maybe 50 people, showed up. And that would have been everybody that was living around here. 1837. By 1840, y'all can see this okay, there are 553 people according to the census living in Austin. 553 people. By 1850, that had jumped a whopping to 629. get to that. All right. All right. Okay. So think about that. So Billy Barton and his people, they were out here, they were creating, not only getting the water they needed from the springs, because when it comes down to it, the water is why we are all here. Okay, even today, the water is why we're here. Is also where he started raising cattle, raising agriculture, feeding his cattle, doing hunting, living, surviving. But he was also looking and expanding. As Austin was settled, people started coming down here to go hunting, go fishing, even go bathing. A little different than swimming, they were bathing, which is like jump in the water, wash yourself off. Swimming didn't come along until much later. But as people came in, and even then, Billy Barton was looking at, he contracted out, I forget the name of the exact person, he contracted out for someone to put in a sawmill using the spring conditions. And that was kind of the start of, during that period, water was viewed as the source of power. It drove the development of communities. If you had power, you could have industry. And the springs at Barton's were viewed as, not necessarily as this natural wonder, but a natural wonder that could be exploited for economic purposes. One of the first people to do that was Billy Barton, when he contracted out for a sawmill, probably over at what's now Eliza Springs. Mr. Barton died about 1840. He wasn't here that long, but his son stayed here, lived here for a while. Now, all the land here, when I was talking about land disputes, there's a lot of land disputes about all this. And if you're interested in that, I can show you the documentation. You can read those stories. They're kind of interesting about who bought who and who sued who and all that fun stuff. But basically, it was all settled down. The Bartons sold out. The guys named the Rabs bought most of this property. They built a cabin right on the other side of the little creek over here. And they were living, and the Rabs were part of the original, of Travis's original, the original 300 that settled in his colony. So they had moved in from East Texas. So they moved over here, what was it, about 1840, and then Mr. Rab died in 1860. After he died, his wife built a 2-story limestone building that was situated right past where that tent is on the other side of the creek. That building would have stayed there until the 1955. And when you start looking at historical pictures of this place, you will see that building sticking out. And she and one of her family lived there until 1955. But the Rabs also bought all of the springs over here. And through many different sales and deals and all that, lots of things happened. One of which was they worked with a guy named Padgett to work down at what is now Sunken Gardens to create a little grist mill. And this is a nice one. Nice little grist mill there. You can see the dam there. This is the milling building. What's interesting, if you look over here, there's a drive shaft that goes down and goes down into a horizontal water wheel. And it was really powerful. It was almost 4 horsepower. You can pass that around. It was real powerful. Okay. Well, this was in the 1870s. Okay. In about the same time, or around that time, and this is where it gets a little controversial and that we're not really sure about all this, but over at what is now Eliza Springs, there was also a sawmill. It's called the Rab Mill. And this is a picture that is supposed to be the Rab Mill. And if you notice, it is very similar to Padgett's mill, only it looks a lot rougher. The one thing that's different about this, it looks like, and there we go. Okay. It looks like this may have been through a flood because all the supports of the grinding floor are gone and it's starting to tilt over. So this looks like it's derelict. Okay, thank you.
This would be 1870s also?
That would be the 1870s also.
So that's an early picture.
Yeah. it wasn't just the mills that were going on at that time. It was also people visiting this place. And most of you may have seen this picture. This was probably done in the 1880s of people visiting what some people think of as the Padgy Mill. But after seeing that Rab Mill one and this one, I'm thinking this may be over at Eliza, but I don't know that for sure. Here, you can pass that. If you look at this picture, which we think is Eliza Springs, you notice the couple in there. We think that's the same. I think that's the same couple.
The outfits are the same.
Okay. Yeah. So, you had those mills, those little 2-bit mills. Well, there were people all over, and they were looking at Austin, and they were looking at the water power down here, and they were saying, and this was at a time when the water was really flowing, and they said, this is where we can have major milling operations. So in the late 1870s, the Rabs made a deal with a pair of gentlemen, a father and son team called English and English, and they built this 3-story mill that would have been situated right down on the bank of what we now call the pool, right down there. They used a debris dam to back up the headwaters of the springs, and then they used that water to go down a mill chase down to a large turbine horizontal water wheel.
That would be on this side of the water?
This would be on this side of the springs. That was a major mill. Ran 2 large stones, and they could produce quite a lot. Well, 1886, the top of that mill burned. It only ran for about 6 years. And at that point, the English gave up, and they gave all the property back to the Rabs. In later pictures of the springs, Barton Springs in the 1920s, you can still see the foundations for the English and English mill. Now, that wasn't the only thing that was going on. There used to not be a Barton Springs road. The road that came out here, which was Old Bee Caves Road, would have come right through where we're about right through this area right here, and then made a right turn and go across a creek crossing just upstream of the dam, of what is now the dam. This is a bridge that was built at that time. It lasted about 8 years before it disappeared by flood. The abutment is still there. But again, looking at aerial pictures from the 1920s, you can still see the road trace for Old Barton Springs Road. It used to go across there and then go up by what is now the road that goes up by MPAff Recreation Center. Yep, that's that bridge.
Where did the road go to after it went across over there?
Went on probably out what is now Bee Caves Road in that area, because Westlake and Rollingwood really weren't there. There was there were some people living up there, so the next village really was the village of Bee Cave. Okay. So the English and English mill burned. Well, then something else happened. You had researchers, scientists started looking at where did the water from Barton Springs come from. And one of the first scientific publications describing the Edwards Formation, and they actually did it quite accurately, appeared in the U.S. Geological Survey of about 1896. I think I've got that about there. And in that publication is this picture that they say is Barton Springs, and I'm pretty convinced is Barton Springs. Some others think it's not. But it's looking downstream during a dry period, when this is very dry. This is the rock form that underlies the cement that is now on the south side. And if this was on a computer, you could actually blow it up and actually see where the English and English Foundation is, right over there. Okay. These are all stories that are written here, but they're not obvious here now, except for the bridge abutment, because it's all been changed by the hand of humans. The oldest building in Zilker Park sits over at the Austin Nature and Science Center. We run a preschool out of it now called the Nature's Way Preschool. It is the Ashford McGill House. The McGills, they were some of the early settlers here as well. They bought land and started homesteading up by where the Nature Center is back in the 1860s and 1870s. The building up there dates back to the 1870s. It was originally built as 3 separate buildings whose corners touched. You know, in most houses, when you go from one room to the next, you actually go through a corridor. Well, at the McGill house, you actually had to go outside and into the other room. Now, why they did that, we don't know.
The house was burned up and didn't lose the whole house.
There's all sorts of possibilities. The McGills ran a ferry crossing down at the river. It was called McGill's Crossing. They also ran cattle up in that area over there. And I love their brand. It was IOU. The McGills lived there for 40 years. And he actually died in that house in the 1890s. Now, coming to the 1890s, specifically coming to the late 1890s, there's another character come to our stage. And he's a character we all know the name of. His name was Andrew Zilker. He's what this park is named for. Now, Mr. Zilker came to Austin in the 1870s as a penniless young man. There's all sorts of wonderful stories about him spending this first day, spending half his money to get someplace to eat and washing dishes to have a place to stay, and then going to start work on the construction of the Congress Avenue Bridge, and then starting to work at an ice plant, becoming fascinated with the ice plant operation, learning about it, and within something like 6 months to a year, he became the engineer for the ice plant. Obviously, one of these nice A-type personalities that goes out and gets stuff done. Well, he acquired lots of money. He started his own ice company. He bought the ice company, started making a lot of money, and he started buying land over in what is now here. He bought the whole tract from the Rabs. He bought all of what is now Zilker Park in about 3 different sales. And he was actually looking at living out over here until his wife died, and then he changed his plans. But even when he wasn't living over here, what he did out here was he used this to raise grain. Why did he need grain? To feed his horses. Why did he need horses? To deliver the ice. It all fits together. When you start thinking about the economic situations in any particular point in history, you need to look at not just the one thing, but how the whole system worked. So this area during that time, late 1800s, early 1900s, was agricultural. Well, that, and it was also manufacturing and quarrying. After the Civil War, a guy named William Walsh, who had worked at the Texas Land Office before the Civil War, and then had proceeded to go and join up with the Confederate Army, specifically Hood's Brigade, he came back here and decided that there was no way that he was going to work for the Reconstruction government. So he moved his mother and 2 brothers out. They bought some land right over by what is now Eliza Springs, which at that time was being called Walsh's Springs. And they started doing things like cutting wood and hand quarrying stone. And where we think the quarries that he used were actually, you drive through that site every day if you come in the north side, and you come down that hill, through that hill that comes into those light standards. According to one description, when they put that road in, that road went through the quarry. So everything you see where the train station tunnel and all that, that was probably where they were quarrying limestone. Okay, this is still got to do some more research on that, but it's got interesting possibilities there. But Walsh was over there, and he had that place. And then after Reconstruction, there were problems up at the land office, so the governor appointed him to kind of clean things up. So he did. He was responsible for making sure that the Texas Capitol got built with granite instead of limestone. He was the one that originally set out the lands for the 40 acres of the University of Texas. He lived right over here.
What was his first name?
William C. Walsh, known as Captain Walsh.
Walsh starts on the road?
Excuse me?
Walsh starts on the road? Is that...
I don't know if it's that. I don't think so. When I was doing research on Mr. Walsh, I did an online search for Walsh, knowing he was a Civil War veteran, and I came up with this Civil War veteran named William Walsh that lived up in Round Rock. And so who's Walsh's Landing is named for. He is a Civil War veteran, except for one small problem. He was a Union veteran, not a Confederate veteran. One of the funny things was he was in the concrete business. So you had William Walsh down here doing quarrying, and you had a William Walsh up there doing construction, doing cement. Boy, I bet there was a lot of confusion there. But okay, those are just some of the stories that you can find when you start researching the things here. Is Walsh, anything evident about Walsh still here? No. In fact, his name, we call it Eliza Springs now. We don't call it Walsh's Springs. That's a story that's probably, unless we start looking at it and preserving it and retelling it, it's going to be lost. I know, how are we doing on time? Oh, okay. Okay, all right. Well, we haven't even gotten into the good stuff yet.
Let's go.
Right. Okay, so Andrew Zilker, he started buying up all this land. Bought the land from Walsh, bought the land from the Ashley, the McGills, and the Rabs. And then his wife died, and he started reevaluating his life. And in 1917, he approached the city of Austin. Well, specifically approached the school district. And he says, I want to do something for the school district. And so they worked out this deal, three-way deal. Zilker would give the 35 acres around Barton Springs to the school district. The school district would then sell it to the city. The monies that the school district got from the city were supposed to go into vocational and home economic programs. Well, at that time, something else was going on. 1915, 1917. Well, there was the war, which is one thing. I'm glad you brought that up. But there was something else. Drought. There's this famous picture, and I don't have a copy of it, of a soldier standing on the Colorado River, and he is spanning the Colorado River with his legs. That was in 1917. Well, some movers and shakers with the city of Austin, they were looking at having some military camps here because of the war, and they said, hey, there's economics, but they had to have a water supply. So they were saying, hey, we get hold of the springs over here, we have our water supply for our military camps. And so they talked the city into it. The city bought it. You'll see by 1870 we had a whopping 5,000 people in Austin. Now all those mills going on, that was with a population of 5,000 people. By 1910, just before Zilker started selling his land, we had 30,000 people. Still think about it, 30,000 people, not that many. Well, it was a close election. There was only a 175 vote difference between accepting Zilker's offer and not, but they went ahead and accepted it. And that way, the city of Austin took possession of what is now Barton Springs. If we take a look at this map here, the part he sold was this part right up here. Because he wasn't done yet. In the 1830s, he did another deal with the school district to sell 350 more acres. And that's what you see here. The Great Lawn, what is now the Nature Center, what is now the Garden Center, pretty much the heart of Zilker Park, the core of Zilker Park was sold by Zilker to what was it, 1835. All right, this map right here, it's not a map, overhead picture. Oh, are we okay? All right, okay. With this overhead picture, this was taken in the 1920s. And what you see, this is kind of deceptive here, because we think of Barton Springs Road as heading out this way. Well, this picture was taken before Barton Springs Road was established. It was taken right after the city took possession and built Barton Springs Bridge. The road came in, you took a left-hand turn as soon as you got across that bridge. And where that road came in is right underneath the cliff, the rock face on the other side. Right. In other words, where the Hillside Theater is now, and right, you're sitting there watching the plays, there would have been a road right through there. And that road would have kept on going on out that road that goes up toward the MPAff Recreation Center. That's Old Bee Caves Road. Now, at the same time in the 1820s, the city authorized the building of a caretaker cottage. 1925. 1825, 19. We're in the 1900s now. If I say 1800s, I mean 1900s.
We already got it.
Okay, all right. So they also built a windmill concession stand. The Lions Club built a 2-story bathhouse. Here is a picture of the caretaker's cottage. It's still there. It's behind a bamboo fence. Parks and Recreation Department is now remodeling that,
Cool.
and it's going to become the, as I understand, the new ranger headquarters, park ranger headquarters. Now, the guy that originally lived there was a guy named Buster Robinson. His son Jack Robinson would later become the first manager for Zilker Park in 1964. Jack Robinson grew up in Zilker Park, grew up in this house. And he has wonderful stories. He's still with us, he's in poor health right now, but we've been able to get a lot of stories from him about that.
How old is he?
I think he's in his 90s now. Okay, okay. But this is the caretaker cottage. Here, let's go with the 2-story bathhouse. Not the original bathhouse, this is the second bathhouse. The original bathhouse was just this little kind of shack. This is a 2-story bathhouse. You had changing down below and dancing on top. All right, done by the Lions Club. This predates the dam.
What year?
That would have been 1925, something like that. Yes, they were. Now, at that same time, we'll get to that in a minute. Austin was looking at, you all may have seen this before.
Yeah.
This is billboards that were put up because they were really kind of marketing this place as a automobile park, automobile camping park. And I'll pass this around, but you can see this is done in the this is 1919 probably, soon after the sale. And this is people playing in the springs.
Just like today.
Yeah. And here's another one. You can pass that around over there. Now, and this is another one showing, this one's a little later, this is 1925. This is showing the 2-story bathhouse over here. But if you look over here,
Yeah.
that 2-story building right there, that's the Rab House,
Oh, really?
which would have been right over there.
Right.
Okay.
Pretty cool.
And here's a better picture of the 2-story bathhouse, if you want to pass that around. And they did things like they put a little footbridge around just so you get across. Oh, and by the way, the Rabs like to advertise. They sold their rights for advertising. There used to be billboards up over the spring. Now, I want to show this picture. This dates back to, I think this is about 1919 too. Besides the wonderful swimming suits they have, if you look right across the creek here, you see there's this wood structure right there. I'm thinking that may be the original bathhouse, which was a small wood structure where you could change clothes. Well, that was 1920s, 1919, 1920s. By 1929, city had passed bonds and they started building the dams. 1929, dam construction. The pool that we now know started taking shape.
This is 1929?
1929.
And it was completed that year too?
Yeah. Now, gotta move along here a little bit. Okay, 1929. Something else happened in 1929. Anybody remember what that was?
Yeah. One of those things.
Yep. Started the Great Depression.
Lived through a few already.
Yeah, it was a major depression. It really changed things around. But Austin was interesting. It was positioned in the 1920s. They had started working with firms to start planning, doing something called the Austin Plan, which they were looking at how to build all around Austin, what Austin should look like. And one of the primary components of that was a park system, and they identified Zilker as being it would be the major destination park in the city of Austin. So when the Great Depression showed up, well, that actually worked out pretty good for us because we had somebody named John Nance Garner, Vice President of the United States. He had a word in up there, of course some other powerful folks. So Austin wound up getting a good load of recovery monies. And the Civilian Conservation Corps came down here for 6 months. And when the Civilian Conservation Corps came down here, they did a lot. A lot of what you see in the park right now is a result of those funds and those people. This is the Boy Scout hut, now the Zilker Clubhouse, up on the hill. They built that.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful.
This is an interior of that. This is all their work. Remember back then, Austin wasn't very big. In fact, in the 1930s, what was it? We had 52,000 people here. There weren't that many Boy Scouts. They all met in one place. There also weren't that many Girl Scouts. They met in one place. There's a girl, did you know there's a Girl Scout hut?
Yeah, right up here.
In Zilker Park? CCC built that as well.
Oh, really?
Yep.
This is a later add-on.
Not necessarily. Okay. They also did, this is what I was looking for earlier, they also did restoration of the Ashford McGill House up at the Nature Center. Not only that, they did water and sewer work. They also created dams. Y'all know where the Zilker Nature Preserve is? Mm-hmm. Right? There's a creek runs through there, Dry Creek. It actually drains most of Westlake Hills. Mm-hmm. They put dams in it. They actually had it so that there would be ponds down there called the mirror ponds. Excuse me?
See all these small trees?
Yeah. You start looking at older pictures, and after we talk, there'll be all these pictures. Look at some of the, when I said, look at what this place looks like, none of the trees would have been here. This would have all been very open area. This is very much changed. 5 minutes, I gotta go here, guys. All right, so I first ran across the CCC when I was working at the Nature Center, and we were putting a big tent up to put robotic dinosaurs into. And we actually had to dig down in the ground, and we ran into a water pipe. And that water pipe started blowing up, going all over the place, and we couldn't find the cutoff. We thought we knew where the cutoff was, but we couldn't. Turns out we talked to an old guy that worked with the park for about 40 years, and he says, oh yeah, that must be that line that feeds the mirror ponds. Because back in the 30s, the Civilian Conservation Corps, when they built the mirror ponds, they also put water and sewer lines all over the place. One of those lines went down to the mirror ponds to fill the mirror ponds when they were dry, so people could still go down there, put their Japanese lanterns in the trees, and have their parties. Now, there's also sandboxes. There was a bandstand. Oh, I was talking about the concession earlier. That's right here, windmill concession. Yeah. Okay, it's now the rental picnic shelter. Over. Oh. And I'll tell you what, with these, I'm just going to pass these around because the story keeps on going. Lots of flooding happened, 1935-36. There were lots of floods. Those floods wound up damaging that wooden bathhouse. There was one story of them having a reception there and the bathroom's not working and everyone on the second floor hearing the building creak and getting real scared. So they actually closed that down. So they made plans to make a new bathhouse. Then something else happened. What was it? World War II. Changed everything around. After World War II, started looking at prosperity again. 1946, polio scare in Austin. People stopped swimming. But the same year, that's the year they took down the old bathhouse and started construction of the bathhouse we have now. Built in the streamlined modern style, the Art Deco. It is very different than all the other buildings in the landscape here. It was a expression of the community of that time of going forward, of becoming modern. Of becoming a society that was very regimented. When you walked into that bathhouse, you didn't just walk into the pool. You wore your street clothes. You came up, you bought your basket pass. You segregated by sexes. You changed your clothes. You gave your basket to a basket attendant. Then you went down swimming. It was all very formalized. You did not walk around in your bathing suits. Well, that was going to change. Okay. So, you had that whole structure going on. I want to talk about something else real quickly here so we can finish this up. Back in the 1920s, Barton Springs started charging 10 cents for people to go swimming. Now, that doesn't sound like much to us now, but actually that was a lot back then.
Yeah, they are.
Effectively, that kept poor people out. Andrew Zilker, we think of him as this great guy, and he was. He gave these lands, he contributed to his society. But when he was talking about the dedication of Zilker Park, he was saying this is in commemoration of Robert E. Lee and Albert Sidney Johnston, 2 generals of the Confederate Army. He also stipulated that this was only for the Anglo population. It wasn't until 1960 when a lady by the name of Joan Means, who was a senior at Austin High School, one of the first African Americans to attend Austin High. She came in 1956. A few days after all that stuff happened up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they had the Army, well, they integrated down here a few days later with no problems whatsoever. Okay, but in 1960, when they were getting ready to graduate, she and a couple of her friends, all African American, were called into the principal's office and said, "Hate to tell you this, but you can't attend the senior picnic because it's at Barton Springs." She said, that's not fair. So she got people together, and they started going in and literally doing swim-ins. They would jump into the water, lifeguards would come and pull them out, and they would be hauled out. They would walk around the building, come back in, jump back in. These were high school students. College students, UT students, Houston-Tillotson students started taking it over as well. Now, the director of the Parks Department at that time was a great guy named Beverly S. Sheffield. Now, Mr. Sheffield did not like segregation. Mr. Sheffield knew that this was going to end, and he was planning on doing it in a gradual fashion. But because of Miss Means, because of the publicity, he said, okay, that's it. Let them in. Let anybody in. It started becoming part of the people. But that's not the only story here. You know, I talked about the Zilker Nature Preserve. Late 1960s, there was a plan to turn the Zilker Nature Preserve into a zoo. Big zoo, called the Natural Science Park. It was actually all the movers and spakers that were part of the Natural Science Association, who were all the bankers and lawyers and stuff that were the powers in Austin at that time. And then remember, I've lost it. But by then you'd have maybe 300,000 people. Okay. All the movers and shakers in Austin at that time were behind it. It looked like a done deal. But then some people in Zilker neighborhood heard about it, and they put up a stink. They said, we want our open space. And there was a big campaign. In many ways, I consider that the first environmental developer battle in Austin.
What year was that?
1973, 74, some right in there. Because when that was defeated, that changed everything around. The Nature Center that you see over there now is a result of the ends of that. Now, I'm running out of time here, guys. But what I hope I was able to share with you is some of the stories that I have found in my work here in Zilker Park. There are stories all over the place. These are our legacy. Every force on this planet leaves its mark. You know, we talk about Barton Springs being the crown jewel of Austin. I kind of like that analogy. O. Henry called Austin the city of the violet crown. Well, if Austin is the city of the violet crown, then the gemstone at the center of it is the waters of Barton Springs. But the setting in which that gemstone is set is Zilker Park. Natural landscape, completely manipulated by humans, controlled by humans. Everything you see around you. I told you stories about things that have happened here, but you don't see evidence of that now because they've been changed over, they've been buried, they've been changed around. People made decisions. Remember, this is a good one. Remember, today is the future of the past. What is our legacy going to be to those that come after us? Are they going to look at our work and say, hey, I can work with that? Or are they going to look going, what were they thinking? It's our choice. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.